Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing the game between the Sharks and the Canucks, in which the Sharks have lost again, this time by a score of 5-2. How very exciting. And so for those of us who thought maybe the previous game against the Winnipeg Jets was going to be a turning page for the Sharks, as they played quite well in that game, even though they did lose, we have been left sorely disappointed, as tonight's game, once again, they reverted to the headless chicken San Jose Sharks, where they sort of just walked around the ice, didn't really try super hard, and it looked quite similar to games that they had earlier in this losing streak against the Leafs and against the Ottawa Senators. And once again, they gave up the first goal, which was what really seemed to deflate this team, which is not great because you don't want to get deflated after a single goal. But it was Sutter who puts the Canucks up 1-0, and then that just ends up snowballing to a 4-0 lead with Pettersson, Virtanen, and Gaudette. And just a small comment on Virtanen's goal. This is one that he comes in sort of on a breakaway. He's got Dylan right behind him. He takes the shot. It's sort of saved by Aaron Dell, but it goes to video review to see if it actually fully crossed the goal line. They end up, of course, ruling against the San Jose Sharks now for the 6th time this season that it did indeed cross the goal line. But my issue with this was that the referee in his message said that they could confirm the puck crossed the goal line in the reviews, which I doubt because they were incredibly inconclusive. I did hear afterwards that it's because the goal was called on the ice, and since the reviews were indeed inconclusive, they decided to keep the goal on the ice. But then I don't know why the referee had to say he could confirm instead of just saying something along the lines of, call on the ice stands, it's a good goal. So felt a bit bad, but probably felt more so bad just because the Sharks once again lose a review, but wouldn't have really mattered in this game. Anyway, as the Sharks were able to at least ruin the shutout of Thatcher Demko with the goal from Vlasic shorthanded, and then eventually in the last 20 seconds a goal from Kane to make it 5-2, but it still was never really that close, and you could argue that the only reason the Sharks actually get a couple goals in this game is because the Canucks really sort of let their foot off the gas. First thing to talk about would be Aaron Dell, who actually got the start here tonight. Not a surprise after Jones' performance last night and because it's a back-to-back and everything like that, but Dell was not really any better at all. The first goal was pretty much against him. Yes, there was poor coverage in front of the net, but it was actually a very similar goal that he led up against the Senators, where the shot comes to the net. It's an easy save, but he gives up this big rebound that allows Sutter to just tap it home after that. And as I said, the Sharks looked pretty deflated after that. It ended up being a pretty lucky bounce to get to Pettersson. He probably could have made the save on Virtanen, or at least a better save on Virtanen, considering that it technically, I guess, crossed the goal line. And he didn't have too much of a chance on the Gaudette or Pettersson's second goal. So really not a good night for Aaron Dell. He was definitely a part of the reason why the Sharks lost this game, but also not the sole reason, as has seemingly been the case for the goaltenders this season most of the time. Next, I will talk about Joe Thornton. Now, technically, I could just do the similar thing that I did in the Boston review, where I said that everybody was accountable, everybody was at fault here because nobody was playing well, but that would probably be a bit boring, as I would just have that on the board for every single loss for the Sharks going forward. So I guess I'll go back to pinpointing specific players who are particularly disappointing, and Thornton is one of them. He doesn't have a goal yet this season. He only has 4 assists on the year, and it really does seem Thornton has slowed down considerably from where he was last year. His regular season last year was actually quite strong. He centered a very strong third line. His playoffs were not terrible. Offensively, at the very least. His defensively in the playoffs was not great, but this season he hasn't been showing much offensively. He's been looking behind the play, which has been disappointing. He's been sometimes even being bullied off of pucks, which was one of the strengths Thornton has had. And so right now he does look like, not that he's checked out, but that he is at a similar level as the rest of the team, which is quite disappointing to see. And you have to wonder if Father Time has finally caught up to the 40-year-old here, and if maybe this could be our final season watching him. I still hope that that's not the case. Maybe he'll pick it up once the rest of the team does bust out of this slump, or at least I should say, if the rest of this team busts out of this slump. But it's pretty disappointing to watch Joe Thornton right now. Finally, I will mention Logan Couture, as his point totals aren't completely worrying as some of the other players are. Myers still only having 4 or 5 points. Couture does have 10, but you have to point out that only one of those points is a goal. So he only has a single goal this season, and he is now the captain of this team. He is the captain of the Sharks when they've had their worst start in a very, very long time. 4-10-1 at the moment, and I'm not going to say that Couture isn't doing a good job in the locker room, because I have literally zero idea what he's doing in the locker room, but what I can say is he's not doing a great job at leading by example. It's not necessarily his fault, I guess you could say, but he does need to pick up the pace. And I know there's a lot of things that Couture says in interviews where he's calling out other players and sometimes he even calls out himself. But I'd like to see him just, begin to perform on the ice. We need a good Couture game. Recall against the Colorado Avalanche in that one game where he ended up getting like a hat trick, I believe. I think this was game 3 or game 4 against the Colorado Avalanche. He really came up huge for the Sharks, and he always comes up huge for the Sharks in the playoffs. We need him to finally come up huge in a game this regular season, and then maybe that can turn something around. That no goalie could stop, no terrible goaltender performance can stop. Get Couture to get like a 3-point night, a 4-point night like we know he can do, and then that's what is what not I expect, but what I do hope can eventually happen, because we know Couture is capable of it. We know he does it basically every single playoff season, and so hopefully it does occur here at some point in the regular season, and maybe that could rally the troops around him. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action if you still want to watch them on Tuesday, third game of this homestand. They'll face off against the Chicago Blackhawks. I guess the good news is that their first win of the season came against the Blackhawks, one of their 4 only wins of the year, and so maybe it'll only take a team that they're familiar with beating to actually be able to bust them out of this slump and get another victory to, I guess, create some distance away from the Los Angeles Kings, who still happen to be behind them somehow. But fingers crossed that they can finally get a win. I guess class dismissed.